everyone. We're just going to take a moment to pause while everybody comes in and takes their virtual seats here in our Zoom room. Okay, we're just going to take one moment as everyone comes in to take their seat. I can see it's populating rather quickly. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Lindsay Craig. I'm the president of National Review Institute, and I'm just so thrilled that you all could join us here today. A special day of gratitude we have on Bill Buckley's birthday. And we are wishing you a very safe and healthy Thanksgiving, because this is really rather a unique time. But of course, as Lincoln said in his proclamation, you know, even when you're in sort of dire times and you're fighting, and there's lots of fighting and killing at that time, it's a really important time to remember who you want to say thank you to and to be grateful. And so Bill Buckley was really such an inspiration in so many ways. And I'm thrilled that Kathryn had this wonderful idea to have a conversation with Lee Edwards, who's a Buckley biographer and a noted historian of the conservative cause, because it's really a wonderful opportunity for us to, again, remember Bill and highlight some of the projects that National Review Institute was founded to actually hold. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit quickly about some of the stuff that we're doing before we get on to the conversation. As most of you here know, National Review Institute was founded in 1991 to carry on the National Review mission and to complement what was happening in the magazine. And we do that by supporting some of the top writers at the magazine, but also holding forums to help promote their work. Usually we do those in person, and now we've been doing them online like everybody else on everything else that we're doing. But we're really thrilled that during this time, actually our engagement with all of you has gone up 250%. So that's something to be grateful for. I've said at the top of many of these virtual conference calls that we've had that I'm incredibly grateful for this video conferencing technology during this time. I can't imagine what we would have done if we didn't have this kind of capability to reach out and connect with all of you. So thank you for participating in all of those so that we could have much closer relationship with you during this crazy time. Two things about Lee that I want to mention that are connected with our projects. National Review Institute has the Buckley Legacy Project, which we established a few years ago so that we could be very purposeful about the kinds of programming that we're doing to promote and preserve the legacy of Bill Buckley. And we have an advisory committee that Lee serves on. And so we have wonderful ideas that come from him and other members of our team. And we're working towards Bill's 100th birthday, which will be in 2025. And that would be a really important time for us to be able to celebrate the conservative movement and be able to hopefully have forums in person, but to be able to have some different kinds of products and conversations. And so we'll be letting you all know about those in the years to come. The other thing is that we have a course called Burke to Buckley that I know some of you know about. It's an 8-session course that we teach in a couple of cities across the country. And we held a virtual one in the spring in between Memorial Day and July 4th, a six session version of it. It was absolutely fantastic. And we've gotten so much feedback from the sessions that we have in person and then this session that we did virtually that we've decided to launch version 2.0. So this coming spring, we're going to be able to have another sort of like second year of the Burke to Buckley course. And so we'll be letting you all know about that. But the most important part about the Burke to Buckley class is that Lee Edwards leads the discussion on the first session, which is about the founding of the conservative movement and Bill Buckley, of course. And he is absolutely fabulous. And we are just so grateful that Lee has, first of all, we've flown him all around the country, San Francisco and Chicago and Dallas, New York, Philly, and of course his hometown in Washington. Well, I guess hometown is actually Chicago, right? But current hometown is Washington. But it's really amazing to see people from all across the country, different walks of life, different kinds of educational background, different faiths, learn about Bill, sometimes for the first time, and to really understand what the conservative roots were for Bill, where he drew his inspiration and how he formed his ideas, and then how he crafted that into National Review and then into a broader conservative movement. And I can always tell that this is, for some students, the first time that they're really seeing that from a historical perspective, that this is something that really engaged people at a time when they were very fractured. And then now we're seeing that a lot of people see how this could be a unifying theme again. And we know that our role at National Review Institute is to bring people together in honor of our founder, but so that we can all have a more fruitful life, and that we can make sure that the conservative policies and principles that we live by can be put forward and to be most effective to the most number of people. So anyway, with that, I just want to turn this over to Kathryn, who can give you a little introduction on what their conversation is going to be like with Lee Edwards. And again, I just want to say to Kathryn that I'm so grateful for you and all that you do for National Review Institute. It's really wonderful that you are so dedicated to our cause, and that you, I know, wake up every day thinking, how can I help to promote the conservative principles that we all believe in to make all of our lives better? So I'm very grateful for that. And Lee, you are just a treasure. And so thank you so much again for rolling up your sleeves and doing another forum for us on our founder, Bill Buckley. So thank you. And thank you to all of you. Have a happy and very healthy Thanksgiving.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. It's such a blessing to have you as the head of the National Review Institute, and for us to know at the magazine that there's a future for us, you know, as the magazine industry is what it is, and there are all these uncertainties, and particularly at this point in time, I mean, my gratitude for being able to talk about issues of faith and civil society and culture. I'm just really, really blessed to be able to do that, particularly at a time where people can get so crazed about politics, and to take a few steps back. You know, our politics is crazed because we don't have these foundational things right, and so we really conversations like this are really critical right now, I think, and encouraging to people too, because we have been at very, very bad straits in the past, and any student of history can feel a little more hopeful and grounded. And so Bill Buckley was all about knowing his history. He constantly talked about the patrimony, the people who came before, the gifts that we've been given, that we need to be good stewards of. And that's just an essential place to be going right now in order to move forward. And so, gosh, Lee, so Lee Edwards, full disclosure, was my professor at Catholic University 1,000 years ago. Sorry, it was 1,000 years ago, Lee. But I am, there'll be no tests today, no papers. But so Lee, we both knew Bill Buckley. I can't even wrap my mind around a 95-year-old Bill Buckley, you know. What are your thoughts today on his birthday and in this moment that we're in?
Well, you know, Kathryn, it's a wonderful thing to talk about gratitude. I have to begin by saying and explaining that I'm grateful to Bill Buckley because he saved me from myself. I was living and working more or less in Paris on the left bank, trying to write the great American novel. This is back when I was in my mid-early 20s, and wanting to be the next Hemingway or Scott Fitzgerald or what have you, hanging out at all the same bars where they did. And I kept writing all kinds of things, and I wrote a novel and it was rejected, and I wrote short stories and they were rejected, and I wrote poems and they were rejected. And finally, one day I said, well, maybe I ought to try a piece of nonfiction. So as I say, living in France at the time, the usual strikes and problems with authority in France. and this is pre-de Gaulle, and I wrote an article saying that if France did not get on board with a strong leader, that they would become a second or third rate power. Sent this off to National Review. I'd never met Bill Buckley, didn't know him, and got back a little card saying, we're going to publish this. Well, I figured it out, that the market was trying to tell me something. And so if it hadn't been for Bill Buckley, I still might be on the left bank of Paris, if I would be alive, still trying to write articles and novels and short stories that are rejected. So Bill had this ability to reach out to particularly young authors, which is what I was in those days, and give us a little bit of encouragement, give us a little bit of an opportunity to express ourselves. You know, talking about gratitude, Kathryn, and I'm sure you've read also his wonderful little book, Gratitude. Now, Bill wrote what, 50 books or something like that, novels, histories, political thrillers, all kinds of things. But Gratitude is this little book with 4 sections, as I recall. And there's one in there in which he suggests that every young adult, 18 and over, should voluntarily, not mandatorily, but voluntarily, do 1 year of national service to the United States of America. And that this quite simply is what we owe our country. This is a way of expressing our gratitude by giving it this year of national service. And if you think of young Americans and what they would be doing, they could be working, for example, with educating young people in the inner cities. They could be helping out in health areas. Of course, these days, it would be a little bit difficult to do that. But with the vaccines on the way, maybe we can resurrect this idea as well. I think particularly working with senior citizens. Senior citizens love to have visits from young people. And I think working in the inner cities as well, this would be a marvelous idea. And I'm so sorry that it hasn't been taken on except by the progressives, who of course want to make it mandatory. I once asked Bill, I said, Bill, you work so hard. You're always writing, you're always editing, you're always traveling, you're always lecturing, 30, 40 lectures on campuses. Why? Why do you do it? Why do you work so hard? And he said, that wonderful drawl of his, I am easily bored. But of course, that was just a wisecrack. So I pressed him on it. And I said, well, yes, I know you're easily bored. You're always keeping us on our toes when we're around you. But what else? What else? And he said, you know, Lee, I think that we all have an obligation to give back to our country. And he was very much aware, Bill was, of all the wonderful things which he had because of his father's wealth and success after some down and out times and periods, finally striking it rich. And there was Bill getting piano lessons and learning how to fly, having tutors in various foreign languages and so forth, going to the best prep schools, and of course, winding up at Yale. So he was given so much, but he felt that he had this obligation, that it was his duty to come back and to give back to the country. I think also, Kathryn, would you agree with me that maybe another reason why he was so generous in so many ways, reaching out and helping people, was because of his Catholic faith? And I think by that, I mean that there's sort of a twist. People go, I'm not my brother's keeper. But I think that Bill really believed that he was, not only of his brother and his sisters and brothers, but of so many people with whom he came in contact, as I say, particularly young people, that the Catholic sense of charity, of helping people, of giving people, of being responsive to the needs of others. In that sense, Bill was anything but a libertarian, anything but a Randian, but really was a traditional conservative, I think reflecting his Catholic roots. I don't know whether you agree with me about that
Oh,
or not.
absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. And that was, of course, the great gift that his mother gave him.
Yes, right, right. Yeah, that's true. Um, you talk about, again, maybe there ought to be, when we're talking about revisiting Bill's writings and coming out with the very best of Bill Buckley or something like that on his 100th birthday. There's an idea for Lindsay uh, that I would hope that one of the things which should be under consideration, if not in its, because it's a little bit of a long essay, but a partial essay, in talking about this idea of voluntary national service. Now, Kathryn, what do you think would be the reaction of people of your generation and the younger generation to this idea? Or is that just something that it's just, not, it's not self-centered enough? What do you think?
I wonder, with this pandemic this year, I know I certainly pray that it changes everything in terms of people appreciating, our common vulnerabilities, and also, speaking of gratitude, a deeper appreciation for, I might not be the most well-off person and I may be struggling myself, but oh my goodness, thanks be to God, I have a roof over my head. I mean, last night I was walking down Fifth Avenue and just seeing all of the homeless people. You shouldn't have to be sleeping on concrete in 42 degrees in America, and now, are we all so siloed off that we don't fully appreciate that? Maybe. But I certainly would hope, after living this year together where no one is, um, uh, no one is safe from the vulnerabilities, both economic and medical, that we've been challenged with. I wonder if it is a moment to make a big proposal like that.
Well, I think so. And I think maybe what we could sort of bring in, for example, Edmund Burke and his talk about the little platoons of society. We could perhaps make reference to Alexis de Tocqueville when he talks about intermediate institutions and how important they were in the America of the 1800s, which he visited and wrote about in Democracy in America. And I think if we can maybe, or Robert Nisbet in The Quest for Community. I mean, I realize these are very traditional in that sense. Maybe some of our libertarian friends would be a little bit put off by this focus as well, but maybe not. And so I think that maybe if we could perhaps have maybe even have a little what you could call a symposium on gratitude, whether gratitude makes sense or not in this time. And I think particularly as we're getting into a new administration, which I guess is going to happen now. I think I see signs that finally Mr. Trump is going to, concede the inevitable. And we can be sure that Biden, and you can see that already from the shape of the people whom he's nominated so far, that they are Democrats, that they are liberals, and I'm sure there'll be progressives who'll be in the thing as well, and they will look as immediately to government, and they'll say, "Oh well, yes, we like the idea of national service, but let's make it mandatory. That's the idea. Let's make it mandatory." And that's where Bill would jump in very quickly and say, "No, that's not the idea. People should have this sense of that they owe, but they should have it out of the sense of just how fortunate they are to live in this exceptional nation." At least I would hope so anyway.
Well, and what I would add to your list of some of the things we'd reintroduce people to is the Catholic principle of subsidiarity, right?
Right.
Catholic
Yes.
social teaching, I think, can really inform this conversation. And I think it's really important as we go forward. You and I and Bill are all Catholics. There's a lot that the Catholic Church has to offer in this regard. And when we're going to have a president who is Catholic, but takes a very different view of his Catholicism than the church does in some regards, I'm obviously talking about abortion, but not only abortion. I think it's really important to do as Bill Buckley did and be a Catholic informing these conversations in the secular world. Because I think what people have, as with conservatism, frankly, people have manipulated the church, and taken what is useful and thrown away what's not useful. And I think this is a moment for taking that back. I also hope, we've been watching this TV show for that is national politics for a while now, and that's not just Trump. That's Obama too. We have this bipartisan problem, and I often talk to our Buckley regional fellows about this. The Obama campaign slogan, the first time, "We are the ones we have been waiting for," is sort of the problem of our age right now. Bill Buckley was the opposite of that. He didn't think that all of human history was waiting for him to show up. He knew there was a lot of great stuff that came before him, and that he needed to be a steward of this, and not just in politics, but the way he would geek out about Bach and the Oxford English Dictionary. You have just a real appreciation. And then you think of his sailing. He was a well-rounded man who, yes, wrote novels successfully, even something I will never do for sure. But so part of, I think, why studying Bill, remembering Bill is so important, introducing him to a new generation, is because he was grounded in some of the fundamentals that I think we've lost track of in many ways in our culture today.
I think that one of the things that I sometimes say is that man does not live by politics alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the idea of culture and how important that is to us, and that Bill really was an extraordinarily well-rounded individual. Skiing in Switzerland and sailing the seven seas in his little sloop, and riding up and down Fifth Avenue in his motor scooter, and taking care that to reach out to people in a social sense. Those marvelous evenings which we would have at his pied-à-terre here in New York City, in which he would allow people to come together socially and culturally, and people would be able to draw inspiration from that. And I think a word which also comes to my mind when I think of Bill is mentor, and how he was such a great mentor to so many people. And that was part of his giving back, of reaching out to young men and women as well, encouraging them to be starting out writers, but also doing other things as well. He's an example in so many ways. Grateful, I would think, also for his ability, and this certainly is another thing, Kathryn, I think you'd agree with me, that we need right now, and that is his idea of bringing people together. I've called him a master fusionist.
Yeah.
And reaching out to traditional as well as libertarians and bringing them together, and then reaching out a little bit later to the neocons. And he even worked with members of the New Right as well. So about the only person he wouldn't sit down and work with was Ayn Rand, and that was with good reason. But I think, again, the lesson that he imparts to us, to be a fusionist, of bringing together people, keeping in mind that life really, as we say about politics, is addition, not subtraction. It's multiplication, not division. Now that's a cliche, but I think sometimes we use cliches because they happen to be right.
Right. And you also mentioned the dinners. He would have people who he didn't agree with at dinner, and with the board, the editorial board of National Review, sometimes, and of course his good friend was John Kenneth Galbraith, right, the liberal economist.
Yeah.
He was not afraid to be friends with people with whom he disagreed. And Firing Line is such an excellent example too. I mean, Saul Alinsky was on the show, so many people. One of my favorite examples is when he had Hugh Hefner on the show, and he basically begins saying, "I think you're causing the downfall of civilization," with Playboy. But they were able to talk, and it also led to Hugh Hefner inviting him to write for Playboy. He wrote some of his best writing on virtue for Playboy, Playboy and Esquire. And I'm not telling all the young conservatives to go write for Playboy, but he had a fearlessness about him because he had a confidence in the truth. He had a confidence, obviously he had a gratitude for his abilities, his talents, and sought to use them well. And as you pointed out, Lee, I mean, he was tireless in working. I mean, he died in his office in Stanford, and that's kind of fitting in a way. He was brokenhearted after his wife died, and I long thought that he died of a broken heart. And I think that speaks to the depths of his gratitude for her presence in his life.
I think so too. And I think that he did not calculate this giving back. I know how many times when I think back on our friendship, and that was that whenever I went to him and asked him to do something, usually it was to be a speaker at a particular event in Washington or elsewhere. I don't think he ever said no. I don't recall that he ever did say no. And he would just always be there for a friend, for a colleague, for a cause. As I mentioned earlier, Kathryn, the idea of his lecturing coast to coast on campuses, I know that there was more than one occasion, because I've had students tell me this, that he would come in obviously with a terrible cold, hacking, coughing, blowing his nose and whatever. And even a glass of wine didn't go all the way to resuscitating him. And still, but he had given his word that he would be there. It was important to advance the movement, to advance the beliefs that are so important, not only to the movement, but to America. And so again and again and again, I once summed him up by saying that he could have been the Playboy of the Western world, given his background, given his wealth, given his social standing. But instead of being the Playboy of the Western world, he chose to be the St. Paul of the conservative movement, proselytizing for ordered liberty from coast to coast for something like, 6 decades. Extraordinary.
I was so moved. I was editor of the website when he died, and so I wrote the first notice of his death. And so I got a lot of emails from people with their testimonies, and so many people wrote that, it was a similar story. He came to speak at my college, and I picked him up at the airport, and he treated me like I was the most important person in the world. I sat next to him at a dinner, and I rambled on and on and on, and he acted like I was saying the most brilliant things and treated me like the most important person in the world. Then there was one man, and I have this up in my office, actually, this email, a medical doctor who said that Bill Buckley was the fatherly presence in his life. He was a man who was there for him every week on firing line. Oh my goodness, the impact that we can have on people. It's extraordinary. And I also heard from a number of priests and one religious sister who said that he had an influence on their vacations because he was open about his religious faith in the world, and that was an inspiration to them. He really had an impact that is beyond, what you can imagine your impact will be when you start writing a column,
I think that there are so many ways in which you can calculate the impact of a man's life and career. And I think that probably the full accounting is yet to be done.
Yeah.
Of Bill Buckley. I think there's so much more that can be written about him. Some of these stories that you're sharing right here and now, I can think of some of them as well. And I mentioned one or two in my little bio of Bill. But my suspicion is that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of stories out there, and we ought to do something about collecting and getting them together to encourage people to if they can do so much just by giving of themselves and not counting the cost. And
Right.
that's what Bill Buckley was all about.
Well, and getting back to what we were talking about before about volunteerism and the local level, and I I am fanatical about this. I think people don't appreciate the power that their life can be in the world, making a contribution. You know, we don't have to fix every problem. You can really, just by living virtuously and responsibly, that goes a long way. And treating people kindly, you know, it makes a difference. Looking around and supporting, you know, some solutions to some problems near you, rather than getting crazed over what everyone else is getting crazed about, you know.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Kathryn. I think, for example, that as I recall, Bill wrote this somewhere. I did an interview with him back in the 1990s about his faith, and it may have been that occasion, may have been some other occasion. He said that he had been a lector in his church. Now, here's this man he's on weekly television, he's editing a magazine, he's writing books, novels, he's traveling, he's lecturing, and he still makes sure that he goes to his local parish church and reads the gospel and the readings of the day, of the feast. And that's so typical, I think, of him, of looking for small ways as well as the big dramatic ways as well to pay back and to give back to this marvelous country that we have.
And my understanding is that he prayed the rosary every day, which...
Well, yes, I know that, because that's when I interviewed him, I was going this and this, and I said, well, do you have a favorite prayer? And he said, yes, the rosary. And he said, I pray it every day. And again, I was just stunned by this, that as busy as he was and as caught up as he was and as famous as he was, you know, one of the most celebrated Americans of his time, that he again found time to carve out time to give this prayer, to say this prayer, and to get in touch with Our Lady, the Mother of God. I think that says a great deal about Bill Buckley and what was important to him and how his faith sustained him night and day.
And for anyone who doesn't know about the rosary, I mean, it's not a one minute prayer, you know, this is going to take 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
And so it was a beautiful discipline that I understand he got from his mother.
Yes, he did. He did.
I should interrupt to say, for everyone who's watching this, you can give us some questions in the Q&A box, and I'll be taking a look at that if you have any questions about Bill Buckley and gratitude and conservatism and moving forward. I have to say, as a young person knowing Bill Buckley, he wasn't my friend. He was. It was a great, tremendous gift to somebody who was reading and watching him before I understood what he was saying. It was just such an honor to be able to work with him. And I remember one of my jobs was I had to be the sort of middleman between the editorial staff and Bill when he would guest edit one issue a year, and when Rich Lowry had started as editor. And I just remember I've never been so excited to see red marks on a paragraph I've written. Like, Bill Buckley cares what my sentences sound. I mean, he could have said, you know, you silly kid. And instead, he wanted to make me better. And that was what he was like with young people. And I even remember, you know, the first editorial dinner, I think I was totally terrified, you know, that I would be called on and I'd make an idiot of myself. And Bill was just like as gracious as anyone could be. I remember too, speaking of gratitude, I would always get these notes from him about thank you for doing this and thank you for doing that, and noticing things. I was amazed that Bill Buckley was noticing things I was doing, even if it was something he wasn't happy about. I'm like, wow, he even cares I exist. But I also remember one time Rush Limbaugh had a long just sort of ode to Bill Buckley one day, and I can't remember now what had caused it, but Bill, of course, wasn't listening to the radio 3 hours a day, so I sent him an email about it, and oh my goodness, his gratitude that Rush would even bother talking about him. And Rush, of course, had a great respect, almost like a father-son kind of respect for Bill.
Yeah.
And he himself was so grateful, Rush, when he went to the house for the first time for an editorial dinner. And one last thing, his last year was when I grew closest to him, and I didn't have an experience of a grandfather growing up, and his relationship to me in that year was the closest I've ever had, and I was very grateful for that, because I had an appreciation for him. I had read so much of him and admired him, but to just see him at the end as the man, a man with a broken heart who just sort of needed to be listened to. Like, I remember being in an editorial meeting and everybody was asking Bill Buckley questions, and I just thought, oh, let's just let the man sit down and talk about whatever he wants. And he wound up talking about sailing, I remember, at the very last editorial meeting.
Well, you're mentioning Rush Limbaugh. Rush was invited, it may have been the first time, as I recall, when he was invited to the townhouse here in Manhattan for one of those dinners you mentioned. And the limo pulled up in front of the brownstone, and the driver waited, and Rush didn't make a move. He just sat there. And he said, after about a minute, he said, I can't go in, drive around. So he drove around the block, came back again, and Rush almost went around the block a second time before finally he got enough courage to go inside and to spend an evening with somebody whom he admired so much, but who also understood his role, Rush's role as well, in the conservative movement and its importance as a popularizer of conservative ideas and principles.
Again, if anybody has questions, the Q&A box there is where we'll be looking. Lee, expand on the St. Paul idea. Why do you make that comparison?
Well, I think that because, first of all, as we know, St. Paul is traveling all over the place, the known world at that point in the Mediterranean. He was constantly on the go. He was also, St. Paul was also somebody who was subjected to all kinds of abuse, some of it oral, not all of it, some of it was quite physical. So he was not always welcome wherever he was. He was also, St. Paul, eloquent. He was someone who was comfortable with different cultures, different cities, different religious backgrounds, yet he was always promoting the gospel, the good news that the kingdom of heaven was at hand. And I think that Bill felt that same way, that it was up to him, not only, but up to him because of all the talents that he had as a communicator, as a writer, as a speaker and a debater, fierce debater, to be able to communicate these ideas, particularly that of ordered liberty. I think that Bill, perhaps better than almost anybody else, had an appreciation for the necessary balance between order and liberty. And sometimes you're tilting towards liberty, and sometimes you're tilting towards order, depending upon what dangers confront you, either here at home or abroad. And of course, the great overriding threat of those early years in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s was the Soviet Union. And that was the reason why he was willing to have maybe more of an increase of government than otherwise he would have because of that. He was a mentor, as I mentioned earlier, not only to young people like you and me, but also to the famous. Probably his most famous student, so to speak, was Ronald Reagan. They had a very close and personal relationship, and Bill has written about that, and our listeners and viewers ought to try to dig out those wonderful stories in which he's talking about some of his discussions with the president, and even before he was president, particularly about the Panama Canal, in which they had a difference of opinion as to whether or not the Panama Canal should be turned over to the government of Panama, or whether or not it should be something should be kept in America. As Reagan said more than once, you know, we built it, we bought it, we own it, and we shouldn't be giving it up. But even so, they remain good friends, kidding friends, with a tremendous exhibition of humor on the part of both of them. So this idea that he was a mentor, that he was able to provide inspiration to so many different people. And I always wonder, you know, some of these the liberals, the famous liberals, what they coming away from an hour with Bill on, say, firing line, that maybe they weren't quite as liberal as they had been when they first went in and had contact with Bill Buckley. He had a very, very seductive way of leading you into conclusions which perhaps you didn't think that you would come to.
Well, in addition on that St. Paul point, one thing that is always striking to me is how often he talked about the Beatitudes or went back to Bethlehem, and his Christian worldview really was at the root of his defense of ordered liberty, I'm always struck by that. The year after he died, I was asked to give a speech on him as a Catholic journalist, and I set out to read everything he ever wrote on the Catholic Church, and I'm still reading. And that was striking to me for sure. We do have a question here. How would Mr. Buckley advise us to approach the young progressives today? Thank you, Kenneth, for your question.
Well, yeah, well, I think he would say, you know, sit down and talk with them. Take an issue on which you might be able to agree. I wouldn't, if I had my first meeting with a progressive, I wouldn't wave my fist at him and say, I'm against abortion. What about you? You know, that's not the way you begin it. You begin by trying to look for ways of coming together and discussing an issue and sort of growing from there. I would say that taking a look at the history of socialism and pointing out where it's been wrong again and again and again, and say, well, you know, gee whiz, are you one of those millennials who would be happy to live under socialism? Did you know, for example, that Great Britain, India, and Israel, all three experimented with and lived under socialism for 25 years and then rejected it and are now following a capitalist path to prosperity? You know, begin with something like that. Get a good solid fact that might draw their attention and begin with that rather, but don't begin by lecturing them and say, you know, you must believe this, and this is what I believe. And if you don't, you know, casting you out into the darkness where there's the weeping and the wailing and the gnashing of teeth.
Well, here I think too is where Bill's Christianity came in handy, because he had a basic respect for people, and it drives me crazy that that documentary Best of Enemies means that for so many people the only thing they know about Bill Buckley is he lost it with Gore Vidal, which by the way he wasn't proud of. You know, that wasn't characteristic of him.
Oh, Not at all. I mean, he, as a matter of fact, he really was ashamed of it and felt terrible about it and said, "Oh, I really, I shouldn't have done it. I don't know why. I don't know why I did do it." Well, of course, we know why. And he had certainly a reason to react strongly, but not that way. And as I recall, he went to Esquire and he wrote, was it a 20,000 word apologia in which he tried to explain what was it, why this blow up occurred and so forth. You know, also going back to the idea of the Catholic conscience and the Christian conscience and what Christ talked about. You know, our progressive friend there might say, "Oh well, wasn't Christ the first socialist because he talked about living in common and giving all that you have to others?" But there's a crucial difference here that we should say to our progressive friend, and that is that Christ was talking about doing this voluntarily, whereas the progressive wants to make it mandatory, that you should do this or you should do that. And they would take, I'm fearful, they would take a wonderful idea like national service and somehow turn it into a national sentence. And that is not what Bill had in mind when he wrote Gratitude. And that's not in mind when he said we should feel that out of a realization of all that we've been given to give back, but it should not be something that we feel necessarily we will be penalized if we don't do it. It has to come from the heart.
Right.
I think Bill would say that it has to come from the heart.
Yeah, gratitude makes you want to give more and use your freedom well, and that's the spirit of it.
And which reminds me of a longtime friend and colleague of Bill's, and that was Milton Friedman. They worked together, and as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, as I recall, it was Bill who introduced Milton to skiing when Milton was in his 70s, or maybe
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
70s. That's when he first went skiing, and continued for the rest of his life into his 80s, into his 90s. But Milton Friedman was once asked, as he said, "Well, how important is individual freedom?" And Milton responded, I'm not sure that I don't think that Bill wrote these words for him, but they're very Buckley-esque. And that is that Milton said, yes, individual freedom, speaking as a libertarian, which he was, speaking as somebody who believed in the individual freedom is all important. But what is equally important is what you do with that freedom. Do you have a responsibility to use that freedom wisely and well? And it seems to me that also goes to a basic Buckley idea and belief.
We have another question, not to make this too Catholic, Michael. Asked, it says, but what did Bill think of the Second Vatican Council and its resulting changes in the church? I immediately, of course, think of how much he hated giving up the Latin Mass. He was very, very heartbroken. I think might not be overdoing it. He wrote a lot about his love for the Latin Mass.
Well, I think probably he would look around for something good coming out of it. It might be challenged to do so. But one thing came out of it was that John Paul II got to know an awful lot of the bishops and the cardinals at that Vatican II, and I think that probably helped to achieve his election as the Pope years and years later. But you're the Catholic expert, so if you want to expound a little bit more, because I don't recall that I asked him that question in my interview. I wish I had, because I'm sure it would have been a zinger.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have been. I do. Now I forget how many years ago it was. I was going over to Rome when John the 23rd and John Paul II were being canonized, And I thought, oh gosh, I wonder what Bill wrote about John the 23rd. Or I need to remember what Bill wrote about John the 23rd in case I get asked or something. And he wrote the most beautiful obituary of John the 23rd, where and he had taken exception to things that he had said. Pacem in Terris, the encyclical, was one of them. But what Bill said, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but the basic gist of it was that John the 23rd, he believes, was naive in his political judgments in terms of the Soviet threat and the threat of communism, but that we need people like that to remind us of our better angels and to just to be living in a different place, you know. And so he had a beautiful admiration for that, even while, you know, he thought some of what was coming out of the Vatican was harmful.
Yes, I think also that he probably would have played around with what does aggiornamento really mean, and then referring to some of the radicals who came along, radical priests and others came along and took it to mean, you know, anything goes. But this, you know, that may be what Cole Porter would have said, but that's not what I think a lot of the bishops and the cardinals had in mind there. It was an opening, but it was not an open door to every idea which would come along down the pike.
Right. Yeah, no, it was the interpretations of the council where things went wrong, not the council itself. I am very very confident in. Lee, as we're nearing the end of this crazy year, one of my fears is that people are just hoping, you know, everything gets better come January, which of course is not the case. What do you think conservatives can really lend to the greater culture at this moment? And yeah, in terms of taking some of the best that we have and have had this patrimony and helping us move forward.
Well, I think we can take from Bill Buckley his spirit. Bill never gave up. Bill never surrendered. He went gaily into the fight with the standard held high. He was, I would not say that he was Pollyannish, but he had faith. He had faith in this country, and he had faith in his God, and what Ronald Reagan called the DP, the divine plan. So that was very important to Bill, and that gave him a sense of serenity that we're going to come through this okay. If you think back to the history of the last 50 or 60 years or so, and how many times the conservative movement was beaten down, like with Barry Goldwater, my goodness, who defeated by a larger margin than any other presidential candidate in history, practically. But yet 27 million people had voted for him. And Frank Meyer, maybe borrowing, I don't know whether he talked to Bill about this line or not, but Frank Meyer said, you know, you can build a pretty good movement with 27 million people. And that's precisely what we set out to do. And that's what Bill Buckley did with National Review. National Review was not just a magazine, but it was a political act toward the creation of a intellectual and then a conservative movement. So I think borrowing from Bill's faith, borrowing from his sense of that we can not only survive, but that can make a good comeback. Because why? Well, because our ideas, conservative ideas, are so rooted in the American founding that the idea of limited government and individual freedom, which we talked about earlier, and traditional American values, a strong national defense, these basic conservative ideas are going to prevail. It's not as though you can say about them, oh, well, they're antiquated and worn out. That's sort of like saying the 10 Commandments are worn out and archaic. They're not. And I think Bill would have quoted from that. I think Bill also would have pointed to someone like Ronald Reagan and say, look, what happens when you have the right leader at the right time. Revolutionary things, transformational things can happen. And I'm convinced, and maybe because I am a Reagan optimist and a Buckley optimist in that sense, prudent in my optimism, but believing ultimately in what we believe, that we're going to come out of this okay.
And we have a lot to work with and a lot at our disposal. And you know, I did a
Because
virtual.
of,
Sorry, sorry.
because of Bill in so many
Yeah,
ways.
yeah. And what he built at National Review and the National Review Institute, it gives me some consolation that we're still going. And I love when I hear from people who say that they feel a little saner, you know, when they read National Review online too, that all is not lost. And there's one of the things that I love about National Review is there is a community about it. And so many of these events that Lindsay mentioned are a part of that. And we always love hearing from the readers and supporters.
Well, I think that the magazine reflects what we've been talking about all the way along, Kathryn. That is that it's not just all about politics. And I have to confess that I'll turn to the back of the book first and see what's the latest book review and film review and other insights into our culture. And I think some of the best writing in National Review, forgive me, Ramesh and all you other good guys up front, some of the best writing is in the back of the book from Rick and from Norm and all the rest of them. And that again speaks to Bill's example of this, and that is that politics is not the only thing, and that it's important to keep your feet in the culture, and whether that's music or whether it's art, whether it's poetry, whether it's plays, whatever it might be. And he understood that. That's why, of course, he began writing novels at the age of 50, because he said, oh, I think I'm going to try this because I think this can contribute to a better understanding of what conservatism is all about.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm so grateful at the National Review Institute. I'm the head of a Center for Religion, Culture, and Civil Society. And look, I used to be like a C-SPAN addict, but to be able to talk about some of these more enduring things will only make politics better. It can't make it worse, that's for sure. And so, yeah, it's certainly something that I'm grateful for, and I think encourages people. And we also have had the experience in recent years with some of the things I'm able to do, focusing on foster care and adoption, for instance, but not only that, have conversations and make some progress with people who don't necessarily agree with us on much of anything, except that they don't want vulnerable children further hurt. You know, we can actually work with liberals, you know, and that's so in the spirit of Bill Buckley, who, as we were discussing before, was not afraid to have conversations with people and to respect people and to meet on your common humanity, you know. And so anyhow.
And I think that, yes, common humanity, and that Bill, for all of his background, you might think of him as an elitist, but that would be misunderstanding him, and I think minimizing the breadth and the depth of his spirit. And so I'm thinking of that very famous line of his, and he gave it at Harvard. He was debating someone like James Wechsler of the New York Post, which was a liberal paper in those days, and they were talking about, you know, governance, and he looked over at Mr. Wechsler and looked out at this audience of his, including, I believe, Arthur Schlesinger or somebody like that was in the first row or the second row, and said, I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston telephone directory than by the 2,000 people in the Harvard faculty. And the audience just exploded with laughter. And I think it's one of the great great, one of the best put downs that Bill ever had. But he did say it with a smile. He wasn't trying to drive home and decapitate Mr. Schlesinger. He was trying to make a point, and I think he did, as he did time and time again, as of course St. Paul did. And I think that the sacrifice also, I would mention that yes, there's so many things that he could have done, and he did do almost everything possible in his life. Think about it, except maybe fly to the moon. And if he'd been given an opportunity to do that, he might have done that as well. But this sense of willing sacrifice as part of what he owed to this wonderful, exceptional nation of ours. And I think that he was a patriot in every sense of that word, loving patria, understanding it and trying to strengthen it in every way that he possibly could. And he did.
Well, with that, it's 4:02. We went a little over. I'm so grateful for everyone who tuned in today. Thank you so much, Lee Edwards, for this conversation. And thanks be to God for Bill Buckley.
Amen to that.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.